Disclaimer: the following story is fictional and does not accurately reflect Jamaican laws, and any similarity to real persons or events is purely coincidental.
Another year slipped by like sand through clenched fingers, and Kenzie emerged from the Inns of Court in London with her barrister's wig still folded neatly in its box. She had passed the bar on the first attempt, top marks in trusts and estates, a quiet, steely performance in the oral examinations that left her examiners nodding in approval. At 24, she was now a qualified lawyer, brilliant, methodical, and carrying a plan that had been sharpening itself in her mind for years. She flew home to Jamaica without fanfare. No welcome home party, no Instagram stories. She rented a modest but secure one-bedroom apartment in Ocho Rios under a friend's name, then quietly arranged for Harold's relocation. One moonless Thursday night, she drove a rented van to the edge of the property, loaded Harold's few possessions, mostly clothes, and the small wooden box where he kept old photographs, and helped him into the passenger seat. He moved slowly, joints swollen from chronic arthritis, breath short from the high blood pressure that had worsened over the months of neglect and poor nutrition. His kidneys, the doctor would later confirm, bore the scars of prolonged malnourishment. The body had begun eating itself to survive. Harold said little during the drive. He only squeezed Kenzie's hand once and whispered, "You didn't have to do this, Kenzie girl." She replied softly, "Yes, I did, Dad." The new apartment was small but bright, 2 bedrooms, a sea view balcony, modern kitchen stocked with every convenience. Kenzie had furnished it entirely. New memory foam mattress, orthopedic pillows, non-slip rugs for safety, a recliner that eased his aching back. She hired a discreet, kind-hearted woman named Miss Patsy who came daily, cooking nutrient-dense meals tailored to his doctor's orders, low sodium, high protein, gentle on the kidneys, washing clothes, keeping the place spotless. Kenzie covered all costs from her own savings and the modest income she'd begun earning from freelance legal research while waiting for bar results. Abby noticed Harold was gone the next morning. She found the cottage door unlocked, his few shirts missing from the line, the hot plate cold. She called him once. He didn't answer. She shrugged, poured herself a mimosa, and texted Jermaine, or whoever the current man was, to come over. Harold had taken nothing of value. No furniture, no jewelry, no car keys. To Abby, it looked like surrender. She assumed he'd slunk off to some relative or church shelter, too proud or too broken to fight. She never suspected her own daughter had orchestrated it. Kenzie moved back into the mansion the following week, suitcase in hand. Gentle smile. "Mommy, I'm home for good now," she said, hugging Abby tightly. London was cold. "I miss the sea." Abby preened, her brilliant daughter, the lawyer, back under her roof. She showed Kenzie off to her friends at brunches and beach parties, boasting about my girl, the barrister. Kenzie played the part flawlessly, dutiful, affectionate, always ready, with a compliment or a shared bottle of wine on the terrace. She laughed at Abby's stories, helped plan her next trip to Paris, even suggested new outfits for the latest lover. All the while, she watched and waited. After 3 months, long enough for Abby to relax, long enough for the household rhythm to settle, Kenzie broached the subject over Sunday lunch on the terrace. Harold's absence had become old news. No one mentioned him anymore except in passing pity. "Mommy?" Kenzie began casually, swirling her iced tea. "Now that Harold's out of the picture, we should really think about securing your future. This house, the land, it's all in your name, right? Abby nodded, pleased at the practicality. Yes, baby, all mine. Kenzie leaned forward, voice low and earnest, the way she'd practiced in front of her dorm mirror. That's good, but you know how these things can go. Harold's children are still out there in England with lawyers of their own. They could try to claim some interest, especially if they argue undue influence or lack of capacity back when the transfers happened. Jamaican laws can be creative when family gets involved. Inheritance claims, constructive trusts, even challenges to deeds if there's any hint of coercion. I've seen cases where children from a previous marriage come in years later and tie up everything in court for ages. Abby's fork paused mid-air. She hadn't considered that angle. Harold's children had already snatched back those 7 properties. Who was to say they wouldn't try again? Kenzie continued smoothly. The simplest protection is to add my name to the title now. Joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. If anything happens to you, the property passes straight to me. No probate delays, no claims from outsiders, no messy court battles. It's clean, it's secure, and it keeps everything in the family, you and me. Abby stared at the sea for a long moment, the infinity pool shimmering below like a mirror. Then she smiled, reaching across to squeeze Kenzie's hand. You're so smart, baby. Always looking out for your mommy. Yes, let's do it. Get the papers ready? Kenzie smiled back, soft and dutifully. I'll handle everything. We can go to my friend at the law firm in Montego Bay next week, quick and quiet. And she thinks to herself, Step 1 completed. That evening, alone in her room, Kenzie opened her laptop and reviewed the draft transfer documents she'd already prepared. Joint tenancy meant that upon Abby's death, the property would belong to Kenzie automatically. No will required, no contest possible from Harold's children or anyone else. But Kenzie wasn't thinking only of inheritance. She had more steps planned. Medical reports for Harold were already being compiled. Doctors' letters detailing the timeline of his decline, the correlation with years of inadequate care, bank statements, property sale records, social media screenshots showing Abby's lavish lifestyle funded by Harold's dwindling resources, witness statements from neighbors who had quietly fed him when he couldn't feed himself, evidence of undue influence, diminished capacity, perhaps even elder abuse. Kenzie closed the laptop and looked out at the dark hills. Somewhere out there, Harold was sleeping in a clean bed, eating proper food, slowly regaining strength under Miss Patsy's care and weekly doctor visits. He had smiled at her last visit, really smiled, for the first time in years. She whispered to the empty room, one step at a time. Abby slept soundly in the master suite, dreaming of Paris, shopping, and younger men. She had no idea that the brilliant daughter she loved to brag about had just positioned herself to take everything. With the deed now bearing both their names in joint tenancy, with right of survivorship, Kenzie had secured her foothold in the mansion and the Trelawney Hills land. Abby signed without hesitation, beaming at her smart, protective daughter as the notary stamped the documents and the titles office updated the register. To Abby, it felt like smart estate planning. To Kenzie, it was the quiet insertion of a lever she could pull later. But the mansion alone was only part of the equation. Harold's remaining assets, whatever scraps of his pension, any small bank accounts still in his name, The trust fund he'd set up for her were secondary. The real prize was restitution, forcing Abby to account for years of financial exploitation, undue influence, and what amounted to elder abuse under Jamaican law's broader equitable principles. Kenzie's next legal step was methodical and multi layered, designed to strike without immediate alarm. She also had Abby sign a power of attorney document, giving her full control over Abby's assets. She had told Abby that this is necessary in case she became incapacitated. She, as her only child, will be able to act on her behalf. Abby had signed without question. After all, this was her brilliant daughter, looking out for her mother's best interests. Next, she began quietly, gathering irrefutable evidence while maintaining her cover as the dutiful daughter. First, she filed a formal application in the Supreme Court of Jamaica for Harold to be placed under a guardianship conservatorship order using the court's fairness powers and rules like those that protect vulnerable adults in mental health and family law cases. As his stepdaughter and the one who really looks after him, Kenzie asked the court to officially appoint her as his guardian, citing medical affidavits from his doctors detailing his chronic arthritis, hypertension, kidney impairment from malnourishment, and diminished physical capacity due to prolonged neglect and stress. The application included detailed medical reports, time stamped over years, showing a clear decline correlating with the period after the spell's effects deepened and Abby's control intensified. Affidavits from neighbors, Miss Lorna, Mr. Roy, and others, who had provided food and laundry, describing Harold's frail state, isolation in the cottage, and Abby's refusal to provide basic care. Bank statements and property sale records showing the progressive drain of Harold's wealth. The villa sale proceeds funneled entirely into Abby's solely owned mansion, multiple real estate transfers, farm disposals, and pension diversions to fund Abby's lifestyle. Screenshots and printed social media posts from Abby's accounts flaunting luxury purchases, trips, lovers, and vehicles, all during Harold's decline. Witness statements from former staff, maids Abby had instructed not to serve him, confirming the deliberate withholding of care. The guardianship application served dual purposes. It immediately protected Harold's remaining interests, freezing any further unauthorized access to his accounts or decisions, and positioned Kenzie as the legal voice speaking for him. Once granted, she could act on his behalf without Abby's interference. She did this quietly, secretly, made sure she liaised with a law firm from Little London in Westmoreland to keep her name from surfacing. Simultaneously, under the same court filing, or as a parallel claim, Kenzie prepared to launch a civil suit against Abby for undue influence that wrongly transferred property and funds, a classic equitable claim long accepted in Jamaican law, where a dominant relationship allows one party to overpower another's free will. Constructive trust or restitution for assets obtained through breach of fiduciary like duty or exploitation. Elder financial exploitation framed through general tort principles, example, negligence, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and any applicable provisions under domestic violence or vulnerable person protections, even if Jamaica lacks a dedicated Elder Exploitation Act. Courts have broad powers to intervene in cases of vulnerability. Key to the claim, the timeline showed Harold's decision selling properties, building the mansion in Abby's name, accepting the cottage exile, were not free and voluntary, but procured through long-term manipulation, coercion via the spell's lingering effects, framed legally as psychological domination or undue influence, and exploitation of his increasing frailty. Remedies sought would include setting aside or declaring void certain transfers, for example, the villa proceeds funneled into Abby's property, imposition of a constructive trust over the mansion or a portion thereof, in Harold's favor, monetary damages for the value of dissipated assets, plus compensation for pain, suffering, and medical costs. Potentially punitive or aggravated damages if the court found the conduct egregious. To avoid tipping Abby off too early, Kenzie delayed serving the full suit. She first obtained an interim injunction to prevent Abby from further encumbering the property selling, mortgaging, or dissipating assets pending full hearing. This froze the mansion in place. All the while, Kenzie continued living in the mansion, smiling over breakfast, discussing our future with Abby, even helping plan her next shopping trip. Abby suspected nothing. She saw only a grateful daughter securing their shared legacy. Harold, in his Ocho Rios apartment, gained strength weekly. Better meals, physical therapy, regular checkups. He asked few questions, trusting Kenzie implicitly. Whatever you think is right, Kenzie girl, he'd say. Kenzie visited him every weekend, updating him gently. We're getting your health back first, Dad. Then we'll make sure you're taken care of properly. When the court granted the guardianship order, likely within months, given the compelling medical evidence, Kenzie would move to the next phase. Full disclosure to Abby via formal legal proceedings. Abby would receive the court papers at the mansion served by a bailiff while Kenzie was out running errands. The claims would hit like a thunderclap. Undue influence, exploitation, demands for accounting, asset recovery, the community whispers would swell to a roar. Marla might even resurface as a witness to the original betrayal. A confession from Audra could be subpoenaed if needed. Kenzie had no intention of destroying her mother outright. She wanted justice, restoration for Harold, and accountability. But she would pursue it relentlessly, paper by paper, affidavit by affidavit. The reckoning had begun in earnest. Abby's empire, built on force, love, and greed, was about to face the cold precision of the law, and a daughter who had learned to wait, watch, and strike true. The Supreme Court courtroom in Kingston felt like a pressure cooker on that sweltering October morning. Ceiling fans spun lazily overhead, doing little to cut the thick humidity that clung to everyone's skin. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators, neighbors from Trelawney, who had driven hours to witness the reckoning. Former colleagues from the ministry who remembered Marla's quiet dignity, even a few curious strangers drawn by whispers that had grown into legend. The air smelled of polished mahogany, old paper, and barely contained anticipation. Abby sat at the defendant's table in a crisp cream linen suit, hair perfectly coiffed, diamonds subdued for once, but still glinting at her throat. She looked composed, almost regal, until her eyes flicked to the plaintiff's side and landed on Kenzie. Her daughter, her brilliant bar-qualified daughter, stood in barrister's robes, wig slightly askew from the heat, face calm, but eyes like polished obsidian. Beside her sat Harold in a wheelchair, frail but upright, dressed in a simple but well pressed gray suit Kenzie had chosen. His hands rested in his lap, trembling faintly, but his gaze never left Abby. For the first time in years, the glaze of the spell had thinned enough for something raw hurt, betrayal, quiet dignity to show through. The judge, Justice Marjorie Campbell, a no-nonsense woman known for cutting through nonsense like a machete, rapped her gavel once. The room fell silent. Miss Simpleton, the judge addressed Kenzie. You may proceed with your opening. Kenzie rose, voice steady, carrying to every corner without effort. Your Honor, members of the court, this is not merely a dispute over property or money. This is a case of years of systematic exploitation of a vulnerable man, my adoptive father, my father, the only father I have ever known, Mr. Harold Simpleton, exploited and mistreated by the woman who once professed to love him. We will show through medical evidence, financial records, witness testimony, and the pattern of behavior itself that Mr. Simpleton was subjected to undue influence so profound it stripped him of agency, health, and nearly his life. We seek to set aside certain transactions procured under that influence, impose a constructive trust over assets derived from those transactions, and award damages for the physical and emotional harm inflicted. She paused, letting the words settle. Abby's lawyer, a slick Montego Bay attorney named Mr. Rodney Blake, rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is a regrettable family disagreement blown out of proportion. My client acted within her legal rights. Kenzie didn't wait for him to finish. She turned slightly toward the gallery, voice dropping just enough to make everyone lean in. We will also call witnesses who will testify to the community knowledge long whispered, now spoken aloud, that the relationship began with the use of obeah to compel Mr. Simpleton away from his previous partner, Marla Dawkins. While spiritual practices are not on trial here, the coercive intent behind them is central to proving undue influence. A ripple ran through the courtroom. Abby's face drained of color beneath her makeup. She gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles whitened. The judge raised an eyebrow. Miss Simpleton, you are treading close to matters that may require substantiation. I intend to substantiate, Your Honor, Kenzie replied evenly. We have affidavit from a person with direct knowledge of the initial consultation in St. Mary, her own friend Audra Pearson. Blake shot to his feet. Hearsay, speculative. This court is not the place for folklore and gossip. The judge held up a hand. Sit, Mr. Blake. The court will decide what is admissible when the evidence is presented. Proceed, Miss Simpleton. Kenzie nodded once, then turned fully toward Abby. Mummy, she said quietly, so quietly the microphones barely caught it. Yet the single word sliced through the room like a blade. Abby flinched as though slapped. Kenzie continued, louder now, addressing the judge, but speaking straight to her mother. We will prove that after the initial compulsion, my client was kept in thrall through repeated renewal spells, costly, documented visits to the same practitioner, while his wealth was systematically drained, properties sold, proceeds diverted into assets held solely in the defendant's name, a mansion built on land titled to her alone, a cottage constructed as a place of exile and humiliation, We will show deliberate neglect of his health malnourishment leading to kidney damage, untreated arthritis, hypertension, spiraling out of control. While the defendant flaunted new lovers, new cars, new jewels, all funded by his dwindling resources, she gestured toward Harold. Today, Mr. Simpleton sits here not as the wealthy retiree he once was, but as a man who had to rely on neighbors for food when the woman he married refused to feed him. That is not love. That is not marriage. That is exploitation. Abby's chest rose and fell rapidly. A single tear escaped, carving a track through her foundation. She looked at Kenzie, really looked, and for the first time saw not the obedient daughter, but the lawyer who had waited years to dismantle her empire, brick by brick. Want more stories? Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook and TikTok. Like and share our videos. Thank you for watching.